think ancient Greece was the birthplace of democracy and enlightenment? Sure, but it was also a place where philosophers owned slaves, where the world's first democracy only let about 10% of people vote, and where one of history's greatest military powers was basically a fascist state that threw weak babies off cliffs. Yeah, your textbook conveniently left that part out. What if I told you that the Olympic Games had events where competitors could literally kill each other and the crowd would cheer? That Greek theaters were so acoustically perfect we still can't fully replicate them? Or that the Spartans, those legendary warriors you learned about in school, spent most of their time terrified of their own slaves rising up against them? For the next 13 minutes, I'm going to show you the ancient Greece they never taught you about. The weird, the brutal, the brilliant, and the absolutely insane. This isn't the sanitized version from your history class. This is the real deal. Let's go. When you think of ancient Greece, you probably picture white marble columns, philosophers in togas debating in sunny courtyards, and maybe some statues of perfectly sculpted bodies frozen in heroic poses. Here's the first truth bomb. Those statues and temples weren't white. They were painted in bright, almost garish colors. Reds, blues, yellows, greens. The Greeks loved color, and they slathered it on everything. That pristine white marble aesthetic we associate with classical Greece, that's just what happens after 2,000 years of paint weathering away. The Greeks would probably think our museums look depressing and unfinished. But the whitewashing goes way beyond paint. The version of ancient Greece you learned in school is basically Greece's greatest hits compilation, carefully edited to make it look like the perfect cradle of Western civilization. Democracy, philosophy, art, science, all true. But what they don't tell you is that this golden age of enlightenment existed alongside some of the most brutal, bizarre, and morally questionable practices you can imagine. So, let's start peeling back the layers and see what ancient Greece really looked like. First up, let's talk about Athens, the poster child of ancient democracy. Yes, Athens invented democracy around 508 BC under a leader named Cleisthenes. This was revolutionary. Citizens could vote on laws, serve on juries, and participate directly in government. It was called Demokratia, rule by the people. Except, here's the catch. When they said people, they meant a very specific group. You had to be a male citizen over 18 whose parents were both Athenian. Women? No vote. Slaves? Definitely no vote. Foreigners living in Athens? Nope. The result, out of a population of maybe 250,000 to 300,000 in Athens and the surrounding region, only about 30,000 to 40,000 had voting rights. That's roughly 10 to 15%. Imagine if America claimed to be a democracy, but only white male landowners could vote. Oh wait, that actually happened too. History is fun like that. And those slaves I mentioned, Athens had a lot of them. Estimates suggest that slaves made up somewhere between a quarter and a third of the total population. These weren't people captured in some distant war who nobody knew. Many were Greeks from other city-states who'd been enslaved through debt or warfare. The Athenian economy ran on slave labor. The silver mines that funded Athens' powerful navy worked almost entirely by slaves in horrific conditions. Those beautiful public buildings? Built with slave labor. The leisure time that allowed citizens to sit around philosophizing about justice and virtue, made possible because slaves did most of the actual work. Even the great philosophers owned slaves. Aristotle, one of the most influential thinkers in human history, literally wrote that some people were natural slaves destined to serve others. Plato's ideal republic included a slave class. These brilliant minds who gave us ethics and logic and theories about the good life apparently never questioned whether owning other human beings might be, wrong. Or maybe they did question it and just decided their comfort was more important. Not sure which is worse, honestly. Now let's talk about Sparta, because if Athens is the poster child for democracy, Sparta is the poster child for military badassery. 300 Spartans holding off the entire Persian army at Thermopylae? Happened, sort of. The Spartans were legitimately incredible warriors, but the reason why has less to do with noble warrior culture and more to do with creating a society so paranoid and militaristic that it would make North Korea look relaxed. Here's what your textbook probably didn't mention. Sparta was basically a police state built on terror. The Spartans were a minority ruling class, maybe 9,000 Spartan citizens at peak, controlling a population of maybe 150,000 to 200,000 helots, which was their term for state-owned slaves. The helots did all the farming, all the crafts, all the actual productive work. The Spartans just trained for war and made sure the helots didn't revolt. and the Helots desperately wanted to revolt because their lives were miserable. Spartans would ritually humiliate Helots, forcing them to get drunk and perform degrading acts to show young Spartans what lack of self-control looked like. They had an institution called the Crypteia, which was literally a secret police force of young Spartan warriors who would go out at night and murder Helots, particularly strong or intelligent ones who might lead a rebellion. This wasn't illegal. It was an official part of Spartan military training, assassination as homework. That story about throwing weak babies off a cliff? Probably exaggerated, but Spartan eugenics were real. Newborns were inspected by elders, and weak or deformed babies were exposed, meaning left outside to die. Boys who made the cut were taken from their mothers at age 7 and entered the agoge, the brutal state education system. They were underfed on purpose so they'd learn to steal food, but if caught stealing, they were beaten, not for stealing, but for getting caught. They slept on beds of reeds they had to gather themselves. They were encouraged to fight each other. The whole system was designed to create obedient, fearless warriors that valued the state over everything, including their own lives. And it worked. Spartans were terrifying soldiers. But here's the irony. All that military might was primarily used to keep their own slave population under control. Sparta rarely expanded its territory. They were too paranoid about Helot revolts to send their army far from home for long. When they did win the Peloponnesian War against Athens and became the most powerful Greek state, they squandered it within a generation because they couldn't adapt to actually governing an empire. Turns out, a society that only values military training isn't great at diplomacy, administration, or economics. Let's switch gears and talk about Greek warfare, because Hollywood has given you a very specific image that's only partially accurate. Yes, the phalanx formation was real and devastating. Heavily armed hoplite soldiers with shields and spears standing shoulder to shoulder in tight ranks, presenting a wall of bronze and sharp points to the enemy. When two phalanxes met, it was brutal. The front ranks would literally push against each other, stabbing with spears, while the ranks behind shoved forward. Men would trip over corpses, get trampled, die from heat exhaustion in their armor. It was less like the choreographed battles in movies and more like the world's deadliest mosh pit. But Greek warfare had rules. Weird rules by modern standards. Battles were often scheduled in advance. Armies would meet at an agreed location during the fighting season, which was summer when farmers could leave their fields. The battle would last a few hours, one side would break and run, and the winner would set up a trophy on the battlefield. Then they'd collect their dead, the loser would send a herald to ask permission to collect theirs, which was basically admitting defeat, and everyone would go home. Wars were won by whoever could destroy the other's agricultural land, not by conquering territory or occupying cities. This all changed with the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, which lasted 27 years and got really ugly. Whole cities were massacred. Athens at one point executed all the men of Melos and enslaved the women and children just for refusing to join their alliance. The rules of civilized warfare broke down. By the end, Greece had devastated itself so thoroughly that it became easy pickings for the Macedonians under Philip II and his more famous son Alexander the Great. Speaking of Alexander, let's talk about him for a minute, because his story is wild even by ancient Greek standards. Alexander became king of Macedonia at age 20 when his father Philip was assassinated. By age 30, he'd conquered the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to Egypt to India. Then he died, probably from either typhoid fever, malaria, or poisoning, depending on which theory you believe. He was 32. In those 12 years of campaigning, Alexander never lost a battle. He was a military genius, absolutely fearless, and completely convinced of his own divine destiny. He claimed descent from Achilles on his mother's side and Heracles on his father's side. When he visited the oracle at Siwa in Egypt, he was declared the son of Zeus Ammon. Whether he believed it or was just great at propaganda, we'll never know, but it worked. His men followed him to the ends of the earth, literally. But Alexander was also brutal. When the city of Thebes revolted, he razed it to the ground as a warning to other Greeks. 6,000 people died, 30,000 were sold into slavery, and the city was literally wiped off the map. When he conquered the Persian capital of Persepolis, he let his troops loot it and then burned it down, possibly during a drunken party. When his best friend Hephaestion died, Alexander went into a grief-fueled rage and massacred an entire tribe as a human sacrifice. He was also definitely not the pretty boy from the movies. He was short, probably around 5'5". He had a high-pitched voice and a tendency to tilt his head to one side. He drank heavily, like most Macedonian nobles. The idealized statues and paintings came later, after his death, when he'd been transformed into legend. Now let's talk about something your history teacher definitely skipped: sex and sexuality in ancient Greece. Greek attitudes towards sex were complex and often contradictory, and definitely not what you'd expect from the supposed birthplace of Western civilization. First, women's sexuality was controlled and restricted. Respectable women, meaning wives and daughters of citizens, were expected to stay home, run the household, and produce legitimate heirs. They weren't supposed to be seen in public much, definitely weren't supposed to talk to men who weren't relatives, and had basically no sexual freedom. Marriages were arranged, often when girls were in their early teens being married to men in their 30s. This wasn't romance, it was a property transaction. But men? Different story. Wealthy Greek men were expected to have sex with their wives for procreation, but could also have sex with slaves of any gender, with prostitutes, and notably with younger males. This last part is where modern people get very uncomfortable, but it's important to understand in context. Pederasty, an adult man and a young adolescent boy, was an accepted part of upper-class Greek culture, especially in Athens and Sparta. These weren't equal relationships. The older man, the Erastes, was supposed to court and educate the younger Eromenos, who was usually in his mid to late teens. This was framed as mentorship with a sexual component. The relationship was supposed to end when the younger man grew a full beard and became an adult citizen himself. Modern people often try to label Greeks as gay or straight, but those categories didn't exist for them the way they do for us. What mattered wasn't the gender of who you had sex with, but your role. Being the active partner was fine and masculine. Being the passive partner as an adult citizen was deeply shameful. It's a completely different framework from modern sexuality. And before anyone romanticizes Greek sexual freedom, remember that this freedom only applied to citizen men. Women, slaves, and foreigners had no such liberty. A woman caught in adultery could be killed or divorced and lose everything. A citizen man who prostituted himself could lose his citizenship. The sexual freedom of ancient Greece was built on massive inequality and pretty strict rules about who could do what with whom. Let's lighten things up a bit and talk about Greek theater, because this is one area where Greeks were genuinely innovative and brilliant. Greek drama, both tragedy and comedy, invented basically every theatrical convention we still use today. Three-act structure? Greeks. Dramatic irony? Greeks. The idea of catharsis, emotional purging through art. That's Aristotle, writing about Greek tragedy. Greek theaters were architectural marvels. The theater at Epidaurus, built in the 4th century BC, seats 14,000 people and has such perfect acoustics that you can hear a coin drop on stage from the very back row. No microphones, no speakers, just stone arranged in a specific shape that naturally amplifies sound. Modern acoustic engineers have studied it extensively and still can't completely explain how it works so well. The plays themselves were intense. Tragedies dealt with gods, fate, murder, revenge, all the heavy stuff. Oedipus Rex, where the hero unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother, then gouges his own eyes out when he discovers the truth. That was entertainment. Medea murders her own children to punish her unfaithful husband? Perfectly acceptable theater material. Greeks didn't shy away from dark themes, but comedies could be even more outrageous. Aristophanes wrote plays with plots like "The women of Greece go on a sex strike to end war," and "A man builds a city in the sky with birds to escape taxes." His plays featured giant talking animals, gods getting mocked, politicians getting roasted by name, and more dick jokes than a modern frat house. Seriously, Greek comedy was crude. There were actors in costumes with exaggerated fake phalluses. There were jokes about farting, about sex positions, about specific people's sexual inadequacies. It was vulgar and hilarious and performed at major religious festivals. Because that's another thing. These plays were part of religious celebrations honoring Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and theater. The Greeks saw no contradiction between religious devotion and watching a play about someone having sex with a cloud. Their religion was woven into every aspect of life, but it wasn't somber or restrictive the way we often think of religion. Greek religion itself was fascinatingly different from modern religions. The gods were powerful, but not omnipotent. They were immortal, but not perfect. They had human emotions, human flaws, human desires. Zeus, king of the gods, was constantly having affairs and transforming into animals to seduce mortals. Hera, his wife, spent most of her time taking revenge on his lovers and illegitimate children. Ares was a war god but kind of a coward. Aphrodite, goddess of love, was married to Hephaestus, but having an affair with Ares. These were not role models so much as superpowered soap opera characters. Greeks didn't worship them out of love, but out of fear and respect. You made offerings and sacrifices to keep the gods happy so they wouldn't mess with your life. Religion was transactional. I give you this bull, you give me a good harvest. There was no concept of heaven or hell as reward or punishment. Almost everyone went to Hades, the underworld, which was mostly just a gray, boring place where you existed as a shade. Only a very few heroes got to go to the Elysian fields, basically heaven, and only the truly wicked got sent to Tartarus for eternal punishment. This meant Greeks didn't have the same moral framework that comes from religions with an afterlife of reward and punishment. You didn't do good to get into heaven. You did good because it was honorable, because your reputation mattered, because you wanted glory that would outlive you. Achilles chose a short, glorious life over a long, peaceful one because he wanted his name to echo through eternity. And it worked. We're still talking about him 3,000 years later. Let's talk about Greek philosophy, because this is usually presented as purely intellectual pursuit of truth and wisdom, and it was that, but it was also often completely insane by modern standards. Pythagoras, yeah, the triangle guy, founded what was basically a cult. His followers couldn't eat beans because he thought beans contained souls. They couldn't touch white roosters. They had to perform ritual purifications. When one member discovered irrational numbers, which contradicted Pythagorean mathematical beliefs, he was supposedly drowned as punishment for revealing the secret. Diogenes, one of the most famous Cynic philosophers, lived in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace. He owned nothing, urinated on people who insulted him, and once told Alexander the Great to get out of his sunlight when Alexander visited to offer him anything he wanted. He masturbated in public, and when people objected, he said, "If only it were as easy to banish hunger by rubbing my belly." The man was absolutely unhinged, but he's remembered as a great philosopher because he lived according to his principles of rejecting social conventions and material possessions. Socrates, arguably the most influential philosopher in Western history, was executed by Athens for corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. His student, Plato, wrote down his teachings, but we'll never know how much of what Plato wrote was actually Socrates' ideas versus Plato's own philosophy put in his dead teacher's mouth. Plato's ideal republic described a society run by philosopher kings, where children were taken from parents and raised communally, where there were different classes of people with different natures, and where poets and artists would be banned because art was corrupting. It was an authoritarian state justified by philosophy. Aristotle, Plato's student, tutored Alexander the Great and founded his own school. He wrote on everything: physics, metaphysics, politics, ethics, biology, poetry, theater. Much of what he wrote was wrong by modern standards, but his method of systematic observation and logical reasoning influenced Western thought for 2,000 years. He also thought women were deformed men, that some people were natural slaves, and that heavier objects fall faster than light ones, which is wrong. Brilliant, revolutionary, and still human with all the biases and limitations that implies. The Oracle at Delphi deserves mention because it was hugely influential and deeply weird. People from all over Greece and beyond would travel to Delphi to consult the Oracle, a priestess who would enter a trance and speak prophecies from Apollo. Turns out, the temple was built over a geological fault that released ethylene gas, which can cause exactly the kind of trance states described in ancient sources. So the Oracle was essentially getting high on natural gas fumes and delivering cryptic prophecies that priests would interpret for petitioners. And those prophecies were famously ambiguous. The classic example, King Croesus of Lydia asked if he should attack Persia. The Oracle said, "If you attack Persia, a great empire will fall." He attacked, and a great empire did fall, his own. The Oracle was never wrong because the predictions were so vague they could be interpreted multiple ways after the fact. Let's wrap up by talking about what killed ancient Greek civilization, because it's not as simple as the Romans conquered them. Greek culture actually conquered Rome culturally, even as Rome conquered Greece militarily. The Romans were obsessed with Greek philosophy, art, literature, and education. Wealthy Romans spoke Greek, studied Greek texts, and decorated their homes with Greek statues. The Roman Empire's eastern half remained Greek-speaking and culturally Greek for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire. What really killed ancient Greek civilization was gradual transformation. The city-state model became obsolete in a world of large empires. The old religion slowly gave way to Christianity, which spread rapidly through the Greek-speaking world. The language evolved from classical Greek to Koine Greek to medieval Greek to modern Greek. The culture adapted, changed, absorbed influences, and became something different while retaining threads of continuity. But the ideas survived. Greek philosophy became the foundation of Christian theology through thinkers like Augustine. Greek science and mathematics were preserved and expanded by Islamic scholars during Europe's Dark Ages, then reintroduced to Europe during the Renaissance. Greek art and architecture have been copied and reimagined for 2,000 years. Greek democracy, despite all its limitations, inspired modern democratic movements. Greek theater still influences every movie and play you watch. So what's the real lesson here? That ancient Greece wasn't the pure, perfect birthplace of civilization your textbook claimed? It was brilliant and brutal, innovative and oppressive, philosophical and superstitious, democratic and slaveholding. It was a collection of city-states that fought each other constantly, enslaved each other's populations, and yet somehow produced art, literature, philosophy, and political ideas that still shape our world. The Parthenon still stands in Athens, though now it's the off-white of weathered marble instead of the bright colors it originally wore. The plays of Sophocles and Aristophanes are still performed. Plato's dialogues are still read. The Olympic Games, revived in modern form, still bring the world together every 4 years. The scientific method, the Socratic method, the foundations of Western philosophy and political thought all trace back to these people who lived 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. They weren't heroes or villains, they were humans with all the contradictions that entails. They could be capable of extraordinary wisdom and extraordinary cruelty, sometimes from the same person. They created democracy while denying basic rights to most people. They produced philosophy celebrating reason while believing in gods who transformed into swans to seduce mortals. They built theaters with perfect acoustics while throwing babies off cliffs. Understanding ancient Greece means accepting all of it, the good, the bad, and the deeply weird. It means recognizing that civilization is messy, that progress isn't linear, and that the people we learn about in history books were real, flawed, complex human beings trying to make sense of their world with the tools and beliefs they had available. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real ancient Greece, not the sanitized textbook version, but the full, complicated truth, hit that like button. And if you want more content exploring what school never taught you about history, the uncomfortable facts and fascinating details that make the past come alive, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started uncovering the truth behind history's greatest civilizations. History isn't about memorizing dates and names, it's about understanding people, their motivations, their innovations, and their failures. It's about seeing the threads that connect us to them across thousands of years. And it's about recognizing that humans have always been complicated, contradictory, brilliant, and flawed. Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is never as simple as your textbook made it seem. See you next time.